You divorced the wrong woman. The pen slipped from Dominic Cross's fingers as the room went dead silent, because the signature staring back at him on the $350 million deal wasn't a stranger's. It was hers. If you've ever watched your past stand up in front of you and demand answers you thought you'd buried, don't look away. Some stories stay with you because they touch the parts you never talk about. People who stay for stories like this usually aren't here by accident. If you're still here, this story found you for a reason. Subscribe, like, and tell us what country you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you think. Dominic Cross believed control was the closest thing to safety a man could own. At 39, he had mastered it. His posture precise, his tone measured, his emotions locked behind decisions that had built an empire others envied. He stood at the head of the glass boardroom table, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered one disciplined choice at a time. No photos decorated his office. No personal clutter. Just clean lines, sharp angles, and contracts worth more than most people's lifetimes. Dominic didn't believe in sentimentality. He believed in outcomes. Yet that morning, something sat heavy in his chest, an unease he refused to name. The $350 million acquisition was supposed to be routine. A final step in absorbing a rival firm. Lawyers had vetted every clause. Analysts had run every model. This was his territory: numbers, leverage, inevitability. Still, his jaw tightened as he stared out the window. A name brushed the edge of his thoughts like a warning. Lena. He hadn't said it aloud in 3 years. Dominic packed his suitcase without drama. No shouting. No accusations. No tears, at least, not from him. Lena Vale stood barefoot in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him fold his clothes with unbearable calm. She noticed everything: how his hands didn't shake, how he avoided her eyes, how final every movement felt. "You're really leaving," she said softly. Dominic paused, then nodded. "Yes." "For how long?" Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. He exhaled. "I don't think I'm coming back." The air changed. Lena swallowed. "Why?" Dominic hesitated, not out of doubt, but because the truth was ugly. "I don't want to lie to you." That sentence hurt more than cruelty ever could. She forced a breath. "So tell me the truth." He met her gaze, and for the first time that night, something like guilt flickered across his face. "I'm in love with someone else." The words landed, heavy and absolute. "With who?" Lena whispered. Dominic's mouth opened. Closed. Then, "Your sister." The world didn't explode. It emptied. Lena felt it then, the precise moment something essential inside her broke cleanly in half. Not loudly. Not violently. Just gone. She stepped aside. "Go," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Before I forget who I was before you." Dominic lingered, as if waiting for her to beg. She didn't. The door closed behind him. Only after did Lena slide down the wall, pressing her fist to her mouth as the sob tore out of her. Raw, animal, uncontrollable. Lena Valecross stood alone in her penthouse office, the city lights glowing beneath the windows like proof of distance traveled. She wore a tailored ivory suit, clean, understated, powerful. The woman reflected in the glass no longer carried the fragility Dominic had mistaken for weakness. 3 years ago, she had been someone's abandoned wife. Now, she was a name executives whispered carefully. The contract lay open on her desk. $350 million. Her assistant shifted nervously. "Are you sure you want to sign personally?" The board assumed. "I want him to see my name," Lena said quietly. "Not for revenge. For truth." She remembered the nights she cried alone. The weeks she couldn't breathe without remembering his voice. The way her sister disappeared from her life without explanation, vanishing with a man who had once sworn forever. Lena picked up the pen. Her hand paused for half a second, not from fear, but memory. Then she signed. Back in Dominic's boardroom, executives from Vale Holdings entered, confident, composed, unfamiliar. Then she walked in. Lena. Dominic's breath caught. She was different. Not hardened, refined. Her presence filled the room without effort. No wedding ring. No hesitation. Their eyes met. For Dominic, It felt like being struck by a past that had learned how to live without him. His chest tightened, not with desire, but something worse. Regret. For Lena, the moment was quieter. She felt the echo of what they'd been, but it no longer owned her. She nodded politely. Professional. Controlled. The meeting began. Numbers. Projections. Legal language. Dominic barely heard any of it. Because when the contract slid toward him and he reached for it, he froze. Her signature. The woman he divorced. For her sister. Now holding half his future. Silence stretched. Lena met his gaze. "Hello, Dominic," she said evenly. "It's been a long time." The past exhaled. And neither of them could pretend it wasn't standing between them anymore. Some people don't leave stories like this. They sit with them, because they recognize the cost of love and the courage it takes to rebuild. Staying is a quiet kind of loyalty. The silence in the boardroom stretched too long to be accidental. Dominic Cross was aware of every eye on him, of the faint hum of the air conditioner, of the weight of the pen still resting uselessly near his fingers. He had sat in rooms like this his entire career, rooms where billions shifted with a nod, but never had a single name rendered him immobile. Lena Vale Cross. His ex-wife. The woman he divorced for her sister. Now the woman who controlled the future of a deal that could redefine his empire. "Is there an issue, Mr. Cross?" one of the senior partners asked carefully. Dominic lifted his gaze, forcing control back into his voice. "No," he said, too quickly. Then slower, steadier, "No issue." Lena watched him with an expression that gave nothing away. If she felt satisfaction, she didn't show it. If she felt pain, it was buried deep, where only she could reach it. "Shall we proceed?" she asked, her tone calm, professional, devastating. Dominic nodded. The motion felt mechanical. The meeting resumed, but something fundamental had shifted. Every word now carried history. Every pause held unspoken truths. When it came time for final confirmations, Lena spoke again. "Before we sign, I'd like to clarify one point." She stood, pressing her palms lightly against the table. The room's attention shifted to her instinctively. Dominic noticed the way she commanded space without raising her voice. He wondered absurdly if she'd always been capable of this, or if he had simply never learned how to see her. "This merger," Lena continued, "only works if both parties operate transparently. No hidden interests. No conflicts that could resurface later." Her eyes flicked to Dominic, not accusing, not pleading. Simply aware. "Agreed," Dominic said. The word tasted like irony. The boardroom slowly emptied, conversations resuming in cautious murmurs. Lawyers gathered documents. Assistants checked phones. Lena closed her folder with a soft snap and turned to leave. "Lena." Her steps paused, but she didn't turn immediately. Dominic stood, his chair scraping faintly against the floor. "We should talk." She faced him then, her expression composed. "About the contract?" "No," he said quietly. "About us." The room went still again, as if the building itself were holding its breath. "There is no us," Lena replied evenly. "Not anymore." She took a step toward the door. Dominic's chest tightened. "You can't just walk away." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "You taught me how." The words landed harder than any raised voice ever could. She left. Dominic followed her out, ignoring the curious looks. "Lena, please." She stopped near the elevators, the glass doors reflecting a version of them that felt like strangers standing side by side. "You wanted honesty back then," she said without looking at him. "This is it now." "I didn't expect," Dominic began. She turned sharply. "You didn't expect me to survive you?" The question wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Dominic's throat worked. "I didn't expect you to be this." "This what?" Her voice softened, not with kindness, but clarity. "Whole." He had no answer. Lena studied his face for a moment, really studied it. The familiar angles. The restraint. The man she had once loved with every unguarded part of herself. "I didn't come here to punish you," she said finally. "This deal isn't about the past. It's about business." Dominic nodded. "And Arya?" The name escaped him before he could stop it. Something flickered in her eyes then. "My sister," Lena said carefully, "is no longer my concern." The elevator dinged. She stepped inside. Before the doors closed, she met his gaze one last time. "Congratulations on the deal, Dominic." Then she was gone. Dominic stood in the hallway long after the elevator descended. Arya. He hadn't spoken her name in months. The relationship that had once felt inevitable had unraveled quietly, without drama, without permanence. They hadn't married. They hadn't lasted. And now, standing in the wake of Lena's return, Dominic realized something with sickening clarity. He had traded depth for ease. And lost both. Back in his office, Dominic poured himself a drink he didn't want. He stared at the city as the realization settled heavily in his chest. Lena hadn't just come back successful. She had come back unreachable. Lena leaned against the elevator wall as it descended, her calm finally cracking. Her breath hitched once. Twice. She hadn't planned for the way seeing Dominic would feel, not the ache, not the strange grief for a version of herself that no longer existed. She pressed her fingers to her pulse, grounding herself. "You're safe," she told herself. "You're not that woman anymore." Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Arya. Lena closed her eyes. Some betrayals, it seemed, refused to stay buried. If you've ever been forced to face someone who once broke you, without flinching, then you understand the cost of moments like this. Stories like this are told for those who choose strength even when their hearts remember everything. Staying with this story isn't passive. It's a quiet acknowledgement of how hard healing really is. Dominic Cross told himself the deal was all that mattered. For 3 days after the signing, he buried himself in work with a precision that bordered on obsession. Meetings back to back. Calls scheduled down to the minute. Numbers, projections, expansion plans. Anything that kept his mind from drifting back to the way Lena had looked at him in the hallway. Not angry. Not broken. Just finished. That was what unsettled him most. Anger could be argued with. Guilt could be rationalized. But indifference? Indifference was a verdict. On the 4th morning, Dominic sat alone in his office before sunrise, the city still half asleep beneath him. His coffee had gone cold. He hadn't noticed. He replayed the moment she said his name, "Hello, Dominic," over and over again, searching for something he could have missed. A crack. A tremor. Some sign that he still mattered to her the way she mattered to him now, whether he wanted to admit it or not. "You made your choice," he muttered to the empty room. He had loved Arya. Or at least, he had believed he did. It had felt easier then, lighter. No expectations carved into history. No shared failures. No mirror held up to his worst instincts. With Lena, everything had been real. And real demanded more than he had been ready to give. Dominic straightened in his chair and opened a file, forcing his attention back to the screen. "This is over," he told himself. "She's moved on. You should too." But his chest disagreed. Lena ignored Arya's message for exactly 24 hours. She didn't block the number. Didn't delete it either. She simply let it sit there, unread after the first glance, like a letter she wasn't sure she wanted to open. Instead, she focused on work. She reviewed contracts, answered emails, led meetings with the calm authority she had earned the hard way. From the outside, she looked composed, untouched by the past. Inside, she was bracing. Because seeing Dominic again had reopened something she thought she had sealed shut. Not love. Memory. That night, alone in her apartment, Lena poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching headlights blur into ribbons of light below. She remembered being here before, years ago, when the silence after the divorce had felt unbearable. The difference now was choice. She chose this quiet. Her phone buzzed again. "Arya, I know you don't want to hear from me. But please. Just once." Lena exhaled slowly. She typed back before she could overthink it. "Lena, say what you need to say." The response came almost immediately. "Arya, I never meant for it to happen the way it did." Lena closed her eyes. Neither did I, she thought. But intention didn't erase impact. That same evening, Dominic found himself standing in front of his bathroom mirror, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He looked older than he remembered. Not visibly, just heavier. He replayed the past with a ruthless need for justification. You didn't cheat, he reminded himself. You told the truth. You didn't lie to her. But honesty without compassion was still a wound. His phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar contact. Arya, I heard about the deal. With Lena. Dominic stared at the screen. He hadn't spoken to Arya in months, not since the relationship had quietly collapsed under the weight of what it had cost them both. No dramatic ending. Just a mutual exhaustion neither of them wanted to admit. Dominic, yes. It's done. A pause. Then. Arya, is she okay? The question struck harder than it should have. Dominic frowned. You don't get to ask that anymore, he almost typed. Instead he wrote, Dominic, she's more than okay. And for the first time, he wondered if that realization hurt Arya as much as it hurt him. Over the next week, Dominic and Lena moved in parallel lines, close enough to feel, far enough to avoid contact. Emails went through legal teams. Calls were delegated. Meetings were staggered, so they never overlapped. Professionally seamless. Emotionally exhausting. Lena noticed Dominic's absence more than his presence. It was easier when he wasn't there. When she didn't have to remember the way he used to brush her hair behind her ear, or how safe his silence once felt. Dominic, meanwhile, found excuses to linger on floors where Vale Holdings operated, pretending coincidence where there was intent. He never approached her. Not yet. Both of them were resisting the same truth from opposite sides. That what had been awakened between them wasn't resolved. It was waiting. The resistance broke in the smallest way. An accidental overlap. A charity gala neither of them realized the other would attend. Lena stepped into the ballroom, her breath catching when she saw him across the room. Dominic in a dark suit, speaking to a donor, his posture familiar in a way that made her heart stutter. Dominic turned. Saw her. And for a moment, the noise faded. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. But something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that avoidance was a temporary solution to a permanent truth. They were not done. Not with the deal. Not with the past. Not with each other. Some connections don't disappear when you walk away, they wait. If you've ever tried to convince yourself that distance alone could heal everything, you already know how fragile that belief is. Staying with this story is a quiet way of admitting that some feelings deserve to be faced, not buried. The charity gala was supposed to be harmless. A single evening. Polite smiles. Strategic conversations. Appearances made, then forgotten. That was what Lena told herself as she stepped further into the ballroom, the low hum of orchestral music filling the space like a practiced calm. Chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. Wealth moved here easily, laughing, clinking glasses, pretending generosity wasn't another form of control. She hadn't known Dominic would be here. And now that she did, her body refused to pretend otherwise. Across the room, Dominic Cross felt the same pull, sharp, undeniable. His conversation stalled mid-sentence as his attention locked onto her, instinctively, as if some part of him still believed she belonged in his line of sight. Their eyes met again. This time, neither looked away. It was inevitable. Lena Vale Cross, the host announced moments later, tapping the microphone. And Dominic Cross, if you'd both join us, please. Lena stiffened. Dominic's jaw tightened. The host smiled brightly. Our lead donors have generously agreed to present tonight's initiative together. Together. Of course. Polite applause followed as they made their way to the stage from opposite sides of the room, every step toward each other feeling heavier than the last. When they stood side by side, close enough to feel warmth but not touch, Lena inhaled slowly. Dominic leaned toward her just enough to be heard. I didn't plan this. She didn't look at him. Neither did I. The microphones went live. As Lena spoke, measured, eloquent, commanding, Dominic found himself listening not to the words, but to the strength beneath them. She no longer sought approval. She assumed respect. When it was his turn, Dominic spoke with practiced ease, but something unfamiliar threaded through his tone. Reverence. For the woman beside him. When the applause ended, they stepped off stage together, trapped by etiquette and expectation. A coordinator approached immediately. There's been a mix-up with seating, she said apologetically. We'll need you both in the private donor lounge until it's resolved. Dominic and Lena exchanged a look. There was no graceful exit. The donor lounge was quieter, insulated from the noise of the ballroom. Soft lighting. Neutral colors. A single long couch near the window. The door closed behind them. And suddenly, there was nowhere else to look. Lena moved first, setting her clutch on the table, turning toward the window as if the city outside required immediate attention. Dominic stood near the door, hands in his pockets, posture rigid. Minutes passed. You look different, he said finally. She turned slowly. So do you. He gave a short, rueful breath. I deserve that. Yes, she replied. Not cruel. Just honest. Dominic nodded. I'm not here to reopen old wounds. Her gaze sharpened. Then why does it feel like you already have? The words sat between them, heavy. I didn't know it would be you, he admitted. Signing that deal. I swear. I know, Lena said. If you'd known, you would have prepared. That hurt more than she intended. Dominic winced. You think I'd strategize around you? No, she said softly. I think you'd try to control the outcome. That's what you do. He didn't deny it. Dominic stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching something fragile. You didn't just survive, he said. You surpassed everything I thought. You thought I'd disappear, Lena cut in. I thought you'd be okay, he corrected, his voice strained. I didn't realize how much of you I took for granted. Silence. Lena crossed her arms, not defensively, but to keep herself steady. You don't get credit for noticing late. I'm not asking for credit. Then what are you asking for? Dominic searched her face, the answer frighteningly close to the surface. I don't know, he admitted. But being in the same room as you makes pretending impossible. That was the truth. And truth was dangerous. A sharp knock came at the door. Ms. Vale Cross? Mr. Cross. A staff member called. We're having an issue downstairs. A water line burst near the exits. The ballroom will be closed temporarily. Lena blinked. For how long? An hour, maybe more. The door closed again. Lena let out a slow breath. Of course. Dominic glanced at the couch. We can sit. She hesitated, then did. They left a careful distance between them. A distance that felt deliberate. Charged. Dominic rested his elbows on his knees. Arya reached out to me. Lena's body went still. I know, she said quietly. She reached out to me too. Dominic turned toward her. I didn't respond beyond courtesy. I'm not asking you to explain, Lena said. Whatever you had, or didn't have, with her is over. He studied her profile. Is it? She met his gaze. For me? It ended the night you left. That was the line. The one that cut clean. Dominic closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. I was wrong, he said. The words were simple. Unadorned. But they mattered. Lena swallowed. Being wrong doesn't undo damage. I know, he said. But it changes what I do next. They sat in silence again, but it was different now. Softer. Heavy with things that might still be said. Lena noticed small details she had forgotten. The faint scar near his temple, the way he tapped his thumb when thinking. Dominic noticed how she held herself now, grounded, unafraid. You're not the same woman, he said quietly. No, Lena agreed. I'm not. The door opened again. We're ready to reopen the ballroom. Lena stood immediately. So did Dominic. The forced proximity ended. But the distance between them no longer felt safe. As they walked back toward the noise, Dominic spoke low enough that only she could hear. Running won't work anymore, will it? Lena didn't answer right away. Then no, she said. It won't. Some moments don't heal you, but they make avoidance impossible. If you've ever been forced into a conversation you weren't ready for, you know how quickly walls begin to crack. Staying with this story isn't passive. It's choosing to witness what happens when two people can no longer pretend. The truth did not arrive dramatically. It came in fragments. Quiet moments. Details that refused to stay buried. For Lena, it began the morning after the gala. She sat at her kitchen island, sunlight pooling across the marble, staring at an old envelope she hadn't touched in years. It had been tucked into a box she almost donated, one labeled before. Inside were things she hadn't had the courage to sort through after the divorce. Photos, receipts, notes, and one folded letter. Aria's handwriting. Lena hesitated before opening it, her fingers tightening just enough to remind herself she was still in control. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Dominic had left. Lena, I don't know how this happened, and I don't know how to stop it. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to feel chosen, for once. Please don't hate me. Lena's breath caught. She reread the line slowly, carefully, as if the meaning might change. It didn't. Aria hadn't been an accident. She hadn't been a sudden realization. She had been a choice, made quietly, repeatedly, while Lena was still married, still believing, still unaware. The betrayal sharpened, years later, with fresh precision. Across the city, Dominic sat in his office long after dark, the lights dimmed, a single file open on his desk. It wasn't a contract. It was an old email chain, messages he had archived and never revisited. Between him and Aria. He read them now with a clarity he hadn't allowed himself back then. Aria's words were gentle, careful, always positioning herself as the listener, the refuge. Lena doesn't understand how much pressure you're under. You deserve someone who doesn't ask so much of you. I just want you to be happy. At the time, he had mistaken that softness for love. Now, reading it stripped of illusion, Dominic saw the manipulation he hadn't wanted to see, the way Aria framed Lena as demanding, himself as burdened, and their connection as inevitable. He closed his eyes. I let myself be led, he said aloud to the empty room. Not because Aria forced him, but because he wanted an exit that didn't make him the villain. Lena agreed to meet Aria 2 days later. Not out of forgiveness. Out of finality. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the kind that encouraged confessions with its soft lighting and neutral walls. Aria looked thinner than Lena remembered. Nervous. Her hands wrapped tightly around her cup. I'm glad you came, Aria said. Lena didn't respond immediately. She placed the letter on the table between them. I found this, she said calmly. Aria's face drained of color. I was going to tell you, she whispered. You had years, Lena replied. Her voice didn't rise. You chose silence. Tears welled in Aria's eyes. I loved him. Lena nodded. I loved him too. The difference is, I didn't betray you to do it. The words landed heavily. I was lonely, Aria said, desperate now. You had everything. Him. Your life. I just wanted to take, Lena finished. Even if it meant destroying me. Aria broke then, sobbing into her hands. Lena felt no satisfaction. Only exhaustion. I don't hate you, Lena said quietly, standing. But I won't carry this anymore. Whatever guilt you live with, that's yours now. She walked away without looking back. And something unknotted in her chest for the first time in years. That same evening, Dominic received a message he didn't expect. From Lena. We need to talk. Not about us. About the past. They met in a quiet conference room, neutral ground. No wine. No softness. Just honesty. I met with Aria, Lena said once they sat. Dominic stiffened. And she told me what you couldn't, Lena replied. Or wouldn't. Dominic exhaled slowly. I know now how much I avoided. Lena studied him. Why? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Because with you, Dominic said carefully, everything mattered. And I was afraid I'd fail you eventually. Lena's eyes glistened, not with tears, but recognition. So you chose someone who asked less, she said. Because that felt safer. Yes. The word hung between them. I didn't leave because I didn't love you, Dominic added. I left because loving you required more courage than I had. Silence. Lena looked down at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. That truth doesn't heal me, she said. But it explains a lot. She stood. I didn't come here to reopen wounds. I came to close them. Dominic nodded. And did you? She paused at the door. Yes, Lena said. For myself. Then she left. That night, Dominic didn't drink. He sat alone, replaying every moment where fear had guided him more than honesty. For the first time, he didn't defend himself against it. He let it hurt. Across the city, Lena slept deeply, for the first time in weeks. The past had finally spoken. And while it hadn't given them peace yet, it had cleared the path for truth. The city slowed after rain. Not dramatically, just enough to soften edges. Pavement darkened. Neon blurred. The kind of evening that asked people to breathe instead of hurry. Lena hadn't planned to call Dominic. She stood at her kitchen sink, watching water bead and slide down the glass, thinking about the strange lightness she'd felt after confronting Arya. Not joy. Not relief. Clarity. Her phone rested on the counter, face down, as if it might accuse her if she looked at it too long. She turned it over anyway. Dominic's name sat there, not as a missed call, not as a message. Just a presence. A reminder. Before she could talk herself out of it, she typed. Lena, I'm at the Riverside Walk. If you want to talk, not explain, not defend, just talk. You can come. She stared at the screen, then set the phone down. If he didn't come, she would still be okay. That mattered. Dominic arrived 15 minutes later. No suit. No driver. Just a dark coat, hands in pockets, moving with a hesitance Lena didn't remember from the man he used to be. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They fell into step beside each other as if conversation could wait for permission. The river moved quietly beside them, carrying reflections of city lights like broken stars. I wasn't sure you'd come, Lena said eventually. I wasn't sure I deserved the invitation, Dominic replied. That was new. They walked a few moments more before she spoke again. After everything. I needed to know whether talking to you could exist without costing me peace. And, he asked gently. She considered. I don't feel smaller standing next to you anymore. Dominic stopped walking. She turned back toward him, brows lifting slightly. What? That's everything, he said quietly. They resumed walking closer now, but still not touching. Dominic spoke first. Not about regret. Not about love. About fear. I didn't grow up with softness, he said. Everything was earned or lost. Nothing was assumed. When you loved me the way you did, it felt like standing somewhere without armor. I didn't know how to stay. Lena listened without interruption. That doesn't excuse what I did, he added. But it explains why I ran toward something that asked less of me. She nodded. I used to think your silence meant strength, she said. Now I realize it was self-protection. He glanced at her. You sound like someone who's forgiven. For myself, she corrected. Not you. He accepted that without flinching. They shared stories then, not the dramatic ones, but the small truths. Lena talked about the nights she worked until dawn just to avoid going home to silence. Dominic admitted how empty success felt when there was no one to share it with honestly. They laughed once, softly, over a memory of burnt pasta and a smoke alarm that refused to stop screaming. It startled them both. Healing, it turned out, could be quiet. They reached a bench overlooking the water and sat, the space between them narrowing naturally this time. Dominic stared out at the river. I don't want to be the man who almost understands anymore. Lena studied his profile. Change isn't a promise, she said. It's a pattern. I know, he replied. I'm not asking for a future. I'm asking for the chance to be present. Silence settled, not heavy, but intentional. Lena rested her hands in her lap. Being here doesn't mean I'm opening old doors. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. I just don't want to knock and pretend I don't know why it hurts. Her breath caught, just slightly. That honesty, unpolished and unguarded, did something to her chest. She leaned back, letting the cool air steady her. This, whatever this is, it feels like something I can choose without losing myself. Dominic nodded. That's the only kind of connection worth having. As they stood to leave, a breeze swept in, colder than before. Lena shivered despite herself. Dominic paused, then slowly, carefully, removed his coat and held it out. Only if you want, he said. She looked at it. At him. Then took it. Their fingers brushed. Brief, electric, restrained. Neither pulled away. She slipped the coat on, warmth settling around her shoulders. Thank you. For trusting me with something small, he replied. They walked back toward the street, the city resuming its rhythm around them. At the corner, they stopped. This doesn't fix everything, Lena said. I know, Dominic replied. But it feels like the first honest thing we've shared in years. She met his gaze. Don't turn this into another escape. I won't, he said. Not this time. She believed him, not completely, not blindly, but enough to let the night end without walls snapping shut. If you've ever felt the fragile relief of being understood without being pressured, you know how rare moments like this are. Some people stay with stories like this because they're searching for proof that healing doesn't have to be loud to be real. Choosing to stay here now is a quiet way of honoring that truth. The first crack didn't come from Dominic. It came from the world around them, quiet, well-timed, and cruelly precise. Lena found out 3 days later. She was in her office late, reviewing revised merger documents, when her legal counsel knocked lightly and stepped inside with a folder held a little too carefully. There's something you should see, he said. Her stomach tightened. About the deal? About Dominic. That was all it took. He laid the folder open on her desk. Inside were printed emails, recent. Time-stamped. Internal communications from Dominic's firm. Her eyes moved quickly at first. Then slower. Then stopped. One line burned brighter than the rest. If negotiations become unstable, we may need a contingency plan involving personal leverage. His history with Lena Vailcross could still influence outcomes. Lena's breath left her in a rush. Personal leverage. Her hands went cold. She looked up. Who wrote this? A senior strategy consultant, he replied. Dominic wasn't copied, but this kind of thinking doesn't happen in a vacuum. Lena closed the folder slowly. The room felt too quiet. Too familiar. On her drive home, the city blurred past without registering. The memory of the river walk replayed in her mind. His honesty, the coat around her shoulders, the fragile sense of safety she had allowed herself to feel. Was it real? Or was I being positioned again, just more carefully this time? The worst part wasn't the email. It was the doubt it awakened. She had rebuilt herself on the promise that no one would ever again get close enough to use her heart as a bargaining chip. And now, her phone buzzed. Dominic, I just heard something from legal. Can we talk tonight? The timing felt like confirmation. Lena didn't respond. Dominic knew something was wrong the moment Lena didn't answer. She never ghosted. She was direct, even when it hurt. He replayed the past few weeks, searching for missteps. He thought of the way his firm operated, the people who saw every relationship as a tool, every vulnerability as a liability. And then it hit him. They would use her. Not because he asked, but because he hadn't drawn the line loudly enough. Dominic left the office immediately. He didn't call. He showed up. Lena opened the door and didn't step aside. She didn't invite him in. She held the folder up between them. Is this what I am to you now? She asked quietly. Leverage. Dominic's face drained of color. What? She opened it, thrusting the page toward him. Read. He did. And for the first time since she'd known him, Dominic Cross looked truly shaken. This wasn't me, he said immediately. I would never. But you let it be possible, Lena cut in. Her voice cracked, not loudly, but enough. You let a world exist around you where my past with you could be discussed like a tactic. He stepped closer. Lena, please. She stepped back. The distance felt infinite. I told you I wouldn't make myself small again, she said. And standing here, wondering whether your honesty was real or just convenient, I feel that old fear creeping back. Dominic's chest tightened. Everything I shared with you was real. Then why does this feel so familiar? She asked, tears finally surfacing. Why do I feel like I'm the risk factor instead of the person? Because the truth was brutal. Because love, real love, still scared him. And she saw it. You're trying, Lena said softly. But you're still protecting the wrong things. The words shattered something in him. "I can fix this," Dominic said desperately. "I'll shut it down. Fire them. Rewrite terms." "That's control," she said. "Not courage." Silence. She wiped her tears quickly, ashamed of them. "I won't do this again. I won't rebuild myself just to hand the pieces back to someone who hasn't fully chosen me." Dominic's voice broke. "I am choosing you." "Then you're late," she replied. She opened the door wider. An ending disguised as politeness. "Please leave." Dominic didn't remember the drive home. He remembered sitting alone in his apartment afterward, lights off, suit discarded, the weight of what he'd lost pressing down on his chest like a verdict. He had thought understanding was enough. It wasn't. Understanding without action was just another delay. Across the city, Lena lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the familiar ache blooming behind her ribs. She had done the right thing. She knew that. So why did it feel like grief all over again? Because love, unexpected, late-blooming love, still hurt when it was threatened. And because walking away, even when it's necessary, still costs something real. Some breaks happen not because love is gone, but because it's being tested for the last time. If you've ever had to choose between protecting your healing and holding on to someone you care about, you already know how heavy moments like this feel. Staying with this story now isn't comfort, it's courage. Dominic Cross had always believed decisions were clean. You gathered information. You weighed outcomes. You chose the path with the highest return and the least risk. What he had never learned, what no boardroom had ever taught him, was how to choose when the cost was himself. The morning after Lena told him to leave, Dominic didn't go to the office. For the first time in years, he let the calls ring unanswered. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the city through a window that suddenly felt too large, replaying every moment he had mistaken control for strength. He thought about the email, the language of leverage, the casual way people around him spoke about power as if it were neutral. "I built this environment," he realized. "And then I wondered why it swallowed the people I cared about." Dominic stood. By noon, he had made 3 decisions that terrified him more than losing a deal ever could. The executive conference room was silent when Dominic walked in unannounced. Faces turned. Conversations stopped. "I'm restructuring," he said without preamble. "Effective immediately. No theatrics. No justification." He terminated the consultant who authored the email. He dissolved the strategy unit that normalized personal leverage. He issued a firm-wide directive, written, recorded, and public, that relationships were off-limits as assets, now and forever. Someone tried to argue fiduciary duty. Dominic shut it down with a look. "This company exists because people trusted me," he said. "If we win by exploiting private lives, we've already lost." There were consequences. Shareholders would push back. The board would question his judgment. For the first time, Dominic welcomed the risk. He didn't call Lena. He didn't text. Instead, he sent a single email to her counsel, not her, detailing every internal change, attaching documentation, naming names, offering oversight. No plea. No apology hidden between lines. No request for forgiveness. Just proof. "I am changing even if you never look back," the message said without words. When he finished, Dominic leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, not with hope, but with resolve. Lena spent that day doing something she hadn't done in years. Nothing. She canceled meetings. Ignored notifications. Took a long walk without destination. Sat in a bookstore cafe and read the same paragraph 5 times without absorbing it. Her chest still hurt, but the pain was quieter now. Less frantic. More honest. She didn't regret sending Dominic away. What she regretted was how close she'd come to believing that love alone could protect her. Her phone buzzed late afternoon. A message from her counsel. "You should review what Dominic sent." No pressure. Just information. Lena stared at the screen for a long moment before opening the attachment. She read slowly. Carefully. Once. Then again. The changes weren't symbolic. They were structural. Costly. Irreversible. Her hands trembled, not with relief, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. She closed the file. Hope isn't a promise, she reminded herself. It's an invitation. and invitations could be declined. Night fell. Dominic stood on his balcony, city lights blinking on one by one, wondering if choosing correctly meant accepting that he might still lose. Across town, Lena stood by her window, coat draped over a chair, the same one he'd given her by the river. She hadn't returned it. She hadn't kept it either. It waited. The choice wasn't whether Dominic had changed. The choice was whether she wanted to risk letting him be close enough to prove it over time. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Dominic. Just one message. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to look. And if you never do, I'll still keep choosing better. Lena exhaled slowly. She typed. Deleted. Typed again. Meet me tomorrow. Same place as the river. Noon. Not to fix us. To decide what truth looks like now. The reply came immediately. I'll be there. Dominic arrived early. He stood by the water, hands empty, no coat to offer, no speech prepared. Just a man stripped of strategies, waiting to be measured by something he could not control. When Lena approached, he turned. They didn't smile. They didn't rush. They stood facing each other, the river moving steadily beside them, indifferent to how much this moment mattered. I saw what you did, Lena said. I did it because it was right, Dominic replied. Not because it might bring you back. She searched his face. And if it doesn't? Then I live with that, he said. Honestly. Silence stretched, thick, testing. Finally, Lena nodded once. That's the first answer you've ever given me that didn't protect you. Dominic swallowed. I'm done being protected. She stepped closer. Not into his arms. Just close enough. This doesn't mean forgiveness, she said. It means possibility. He met her gaze. I'll earn the difference. The river kept moving. And for the first time, neither of them felt like they were standing still. Sometimes the bravest choice isn't holding on or walking away, it's standing in truth without guarantees. If you've ever wondered whether real change can happen when no reward is promised, this moment is for you. Staying with this story now is a quiet act of faith. The river looked the same weeks later. Steady. Unrushed. Carrying everything forward without asking permission. Lena noticed that first as she stood at the railing, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. Winter had softened into something kinder. The air no longer bit, it breathed. She had learned to notice these things again. Behind her, footsteps approached. Familiar now. Unforced. Dominic stopped beside her, not too close, not distant either. He had learned that space, like trust, was something you didn't rush through. You didn't have to come early, she said. I know, he replied. I wanted to. They stood together in silence for a moment that no longer felt like tension. It felt earned. They hadn't fallen back into love dramatically. There were no grand confessions. No sudden forgiveness. There were conversations instead. Uncomfortable ones. Honest ones. Ones that ended without neat conclusions. Dominic showed up consistently, quietly. He never pressured. Never assumed. When Lena pulled back, he didn't chase. When she leaned in, he didn't freeze. He learned to stay. And Lena, carefully, deliberately, learned to let him. She watched how he moved through the world now. How he corrected people when they spoke carelessly. How he protected privacy without being asked. How he listened without preparing a defense. Change, she realized, wasn't what someone promised. It was what they repeated. They walked along the path slowly, the city hum distant enough to feel irrelevant. I need to say something, Lena said. Dominic stopped, turning to face her fully. I'm listening. I don't want the woman I was before, she said. Not because she was weak, but because she didn't know she could survive without being chosen. His chest tightened. And I don't want to be loved out of guilt, she continued. Or nostalgia. Or regret. Dominic nodded. You deserve none of that. I want to be chosen, she said softly. By someone who knows exactly what it costs. He stepped closer, not touching. Waiting. I choose you, Dominic said. Not because I lost you. Not because I fear being alone. But because I finally understand what loving you asks of me, and I want to give it. Lena studied his face. Not searching for perfection. Searching for truth. She found it. Later that afternoon, they sat at a small outdoor cafe near the water. The table was narrow. Their knees brushed accidentally. Neither moved away. Dominic watched Lena stir her drink absent-mindedly, the sunlight catching in her hair. A memory surfaced, sharp, sudden. "You remember the night you asked me why I was leaving?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "You told me to go before you forgot who you were," he continued. "I didn't understand that then." "And now?" she asked. "Now I know you were saving yourself," he said. "And I'm grateful you did." Lena smiled then, not cautiously, not guardedly. Fully. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she did it without fear. Months later, the deal that had once felt like a reckoning closed smoothly. Not because of strategy. Because of respect. Dominic insisted on a public acknowledgement of Lena's leadership during the final signing, stepping back, letting her name stand alone. Cameras captured the moment. Headlines followed. But the moment that mattered most wasn't public. It was private. In a quiet room afterward, Lena turned to him and said, "Thank you for not needing to be seen." Dominic smiled. "Thank you for letting me be." They didn't rush marriage. They didn't rush promises. They built habits instead. Sunday mornings. Shared silence. Hard conversations that ended in understanding instead of withdrawal. Love, Lena realized, wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing honesty even when fear showed up anyway. One evening, as they stood in her kitchen, familiar now, safe, Dominic watched her move with ease through a space that once held heartbreak. "I froze that day," he said suddenly. She turned. When I saw your signature on that deal," he said. "I thought it was the end of something. And now I know," he said softly, "it was the beginning of becoming worthy of you." Lena stepped closer. "Then don't stop," she said. He didn't. On the anniversary of the deal, they returned to the river. Same place. Same bench. Dominic pulled something from his coat pocket. Not a ring, not a grand gesture. A folded piece of paper. "What's that?" Lena asked. "The first contract I rewrote after everything fell apart," he said. "I kept it to remind myself who I decided to be." She took it, reading the simple heading. "And no negotiables. Respect. Truth. No leverage over love." Lena folded it carefully and handed it back. "This," she said, "is why I stayed." Dominic reached for her hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. The river moved on. So did they. Together. If you've stayed this far, maybe it's because part of you believes, like they did, that love doesn't always arrive first, but sometimes it arrives right. If this story moved you, sit with it. Let it ask you what you would choose if courage, not fear, led the way. And if you've been here from the beginning, watching people break, grow, and choose better, staying connected to stories like this is one way of honoring how much that journey matters.
Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you'll not miss out on the next video.